Comparing it to what Elon Musk is spewing out, unfortunately, on X, you sound like Brett Stevens right now, with all due respect. It's a joke. That's a real time.
And you sound like him, who looks like Rachel Maddow. Ken Martin guy, he said something I've heard Democrats say a lot. We didn't get our message out. Maybe I'm paraphrasing, but that's it. And I've said this before to Democrats. No, you did. That's the problem.
Yeah.
You did get your message out, and people don't like the message.
But it was Axios that they gave the new media seat to, and that is to Mike Allen, who is like an established reporter in Washington. Axios has been around for like 5 years, sold for $500 million. I don't really consider it new media, and I thought it was interesting that that was their first new media.
It is new media, because old media sells for $1.
That is true.
The push for woke ideology is in full swing, but one person isn't afraid to hit the brakes and call out the nonsense. Bill Maher, the liberal comedian known for holding his own side accountable, just took apart an MSNBC host who jumped on the anti-Trump bandwagon. So what exactly did the host say that set this off, and how did Maher's sharp response leave them stunned? Here's everything you need to know.
Ken Martin?
Yep.
I was not aware of who he was before. I did not think it got off to a great start, because I think they need to completely reroute themselves, and I don't think they did it. What do you think?
Let's take a moment to really focus on the question and how Chris Hayes responds. The question was simple. Maher wanted to know how the Democrats plan to regroup after their election losses to Donald Trump. Now, pay attention to Hayes' answer.
I think there's sort of two different imperatives that are in a little bit of tension with each other. So one, I think there's an imperative right now for the party to stand up against the most destructive things that Musk and Trump are doing. And I think they're doing some genuinely destructive things. I mean, there's people walking around the world right now with like devices inside their bodies from clinical trials sponsored by USAID that they can't get out. The guards that were guarding ISIS prisoners in Syria were paid on USAID salaries that got cut off. There's a 25-year-old mucking around the code base of the Treasury system. So there's things they have to do to try to oppose. But it's also the case that like all of the reflection that happened after losing that election and trying to figure about how do you win back people you lost was real and true. And I guess my feeling is you gotta fight, you gotta try different things, and you have to be authentic. You can't like reverse engineer any of this off a blueprint. And I really think this is true about politics. Steve Jobs once said, it's not the customer's job to know what they want. Like, it's our job. And you couldn't have reverse engineered Barack Obama off of George W. Bush. And you couldn't have reverse engineered Donald Trump off of Barack Obama. What happens in the end of an election is everyone sifts through the data and they come up with their perfect, their plan based on, well, this worked and with this group and we got attack here and there. And what politics about is a certain point is like innovation and communication. You got to come up with new stories.
According to Hayes, it's not up to the customer to decide what they want, and it's not up to the voters to choose who they want either. Instead, that decision has to be made for them. In the Democrats' world, they believe they alone have the right to decide what voters should want. Sounds pretty ridiculous, right? Now, just wait for Bill Maher's response.
Ken Martin guy, he said something I've heard Democrats say a lot. We didn't get our message out. Maybe I'm paraphrasing, but that's it. And I've said this before to Democrats. No, you did. That's the problem.
Yeah.
You did get your message out, and people don't like the message.
Bill Maher shut Chris Hayes down with one sharp sentence. People didn't like the message. End of story. While Hayes went on and on about reverse engineering political strategies and balancing multiple election battles, Maher got straight to the point. The answer wasn't buried under political jargon or complicated theories. It was simple. Give people what they actually want. Hayes' long-winded explanation only made it clearer just how out of touch the Democratic Party is with the average voter. Instead of addressing why their message didn't land, he sidestepped the real issue. But Maher wasn't buying it. He pointed out that the problem wasn't about campaign strategy or how things were presented. It was about substance. Voters heard the Democrats loud and clear. They just didn't like what they were selling. That's the uncomfortable truth the left keeps ignoring. It's not about tweaking the message, it's about changing what's being offered. If your message doesn't connect, no amount of political spin will fix it. And until Democrats come to terms with that, they'll keep losing ground. If you thought that was bad, just wait for Hayes' next comment.
I think that I don't think there's anyone who hasn't had a moment across the political spectrum of some form of progressive communication that's either left them bewildered or a little like, I don't know about that. But I also think at the same time, there is a message of what I would call like common sense, patriotic pluralism.
Yeah.
That is a majority message, which is like, if some father and mother have health care for their kid lined up who's trans, just stay the out of their business. Like, and let them make that decision. That's their decision to make. And you don't have to make that for your family.
You have to appreciate how the left's woke crowd loves to blur the lines. Here, Chris Hayes claims that if parents have arranged gender-affirming care for their kids, they should be free to move forward with the transition, and that no one else should have a say in it. But that's not the real debate, and it's certainly not what the left has been pushing. Bill Maher doesn't hesitate to step in and set the record straight.
Oh, I mean, but the argument is whether the child should make the decision.
But the child is never making the decision. The parents are always making the decision. Parents consent to medical care.
Well, here in California, you're allowed to hide it from the parents if the kid is.
Yes.
Thank you, one person who knows that.
But I mean,
somebody knows that.
What the left was actually pushing wasn't just about parental choice or supporting kids. It was about giving schools the power to decide whether a child could keep their transition process a secret from their own parents. In other words, kids could make life-changing decisions while the very people responsible for their well-being were completely left out. Schools would act as gatekeepers. Just think about that for a second. Parents who are both legally and morally responsible for their children could be entirely shut out of critical decisions about their child's health and identity. Is it just me, or does it seem like the left is already trying to distance itself from its own message just months after the election? Honestly, who could blame them? If my stance was that bizarre, disconnected, and borderline dystopian, I'd be running from it too. This isn't just about politics. It's about common sense, parental rights, and protecting families. The idea that bureaucrats and school officials somehow know better than a child's own parents isn't just absurd, it's dangerous. It's government overreach that most Americans simply won't accept. And deep down, the left knows it. That's why they're backpedaling, toning things down, and pretending this was never their position in the first place. Because when these extreme policies are put under a spotlight, even they realize just how out of touch and impossible to defend they really are. And that's exactly why so many voters walked away from the Democratic Party. Not because they didn't have a message, but because their message was completely detached from reality. Of course, legacy media played its part in pushing all of this. That's why independent media took center stage during Trump's re-election. And when Bill Maher confronted a left-wing guest with this reality, her response said it all.
What do you think of the Trump White House admitting more influencers and podcasters into the press corps? Yeah, the press room is different. I mean, it reflects America.
I think it's great.
Yeah, you do.
But it's mostly right-wing influencers and podcasters, obviously, but I think it's a good step. I mean, this is how people are getting their news.
It is. I mean, how can you deny it?
I was actually over there the other day, and it's packed in there. And
Yeah.
I think even all the reporters, whether you're Legacy or the podcasting people, they're all happy. And then they have like the one rotating chair, which I guess is pretty cool. So there's always like somebody new that comes in.
So this
Yeah,
is
but
you're at the White House, you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah.
But it was Axios that they gave the new media seat to, and that is to Mike Allen, who is like an established reporter in Washington. Axios has been around for like 5 years, sold for $500 million. I don't really consider it new media, and I thought it was interesting that that was their first
Well,
new
it
media.
is. It is
I
new
don't
media
know.
because old media sells for $1.
That is true.
What do you mean by that?
Well, that's what Bezos bought the Washington Post for. He bought it for like $1, didn't he? So, you know.